you all hear me okay? All right, great. Good afternoon and welcome to the 32nd Annual Helen Clark Berlin Symposium, a day-long program inspired by the 112th Annual Exhibition, Back to Front Artists' Books by Women. I'm Laura McManus, Curator of Education at the Maier Museum of Art at Randolph College. Our director, Martha Johnson, regrets that she is unable to be here today due to illness. We begin this afternoon by recognizing that Randolph College resides on the traditional lands of the Monacan Indian Nation. We acknowledge the Monacan Indian Nation and their continued impact on this community. Back to Front, Artists' Books by Women presents the expansive concept of the book as art in an array of formats and materials. I hope you've had a chance to take a look at the exhibition either today or in previous days. The first part of the symposium focuses on artist talks, beginning with Nia Easley. Yesterday, Nia tested positive for COVID, so regretfully had to stay home. We are so grateful to her for being willing to participate remotely, and we extend our heartfelt thanks to our friends at IT, Georgia, thank you, for their quick pivot yesterday to prepare for this change. Nia has two books in the exhibition, A Dozen Deaths and The Last Green Book. A Dozen Deaths is a counter-narrative in the form of 12 stories about Trayvon Martin's murder. The Last Green Book reveals the precariousness of travel in 1962 Chicago for African Americans. Nia earned her MFA in Visual Communication Design and practices an art informed by methods of design production. Her work engages the absurdity, violence, and beauty of contemporary American life, focusing on our shared histories and how they have shaped the current landscape. She is a lecturer at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Nia, we are honored by your effort to participate today, and welcome to the Maier. Join me in welcoming Nia.
Thank you all. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Kathleen. And thank you all for being here today. Thanks for including me in the Berlin Symposium and my work and this wonderful show at the Maier Museum at Randolph College on the traditional homelands of the Monacan Indian Nation. I intended to be there, as was mentioned, but due to health issues, I'm reaching you from my home in Chicago, which is homeland of the Council of the Three Fires, the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi, as well as the Miami and many other tribes that traverse this area using the Great Lakes between rivers in temperate weather. I'm here to talk about my practice as an artist, design educator, and researcher. I'm honored to be part of this show, and I hope that this talk helps illuminate my practice and way of approaching artist books. I read a lot. I used to devour books as a child, and while being an adult affords me much less time to just read whatever I want, I still manage to get some good books in every year. I'm inspired by the book as form, the lineage of bookmaking, and also the ideas within them, of course. However, my practice is not only centered around books, so I'm going to start this talk by showing you a short video that I made towards the end of my undergraduate career. It is silent and relatively slow, so please sit with it as you would a book. It's about 5 minutes long. Sorry, are you all seeing anything? Okay. Sorry about that. Let's try this again. Right. So I made this film in 2005 using surveillance footage from my apartment building. At the time, I was living there with my mother, sister, and 2 brothers. Anyone with a television in our building, which was about 25 stories tall, was able to watch through a dedicated channel. So I simply used a VHS player recorder to capture the footage that you see here. The technology was available to me to use, this technology that was becoming ubiquitous, surveillance, at a time when the Patriot Act had been hastily passed, and I was very anxious about the implications. It's a fairly simple video that quietly presents our everyday reality. An important part of my development as an artist, I feel, was getting feedback on this film. It was part of a show in Switzerland the summer after I made it, and many of the attendees were shocked that I had such easy access to that surveillance footage. Everyday surveillance had not yet become a part of their lives in Zurich. I was able to have conversations there with people to question the necessity and the apparent good of this technology that had become sort of matter of fact in my everyday world. But that was 18 years ago. My little video old enough to vote. The name of this talk comes from this poem by Lucille Clifton, referenced in The Trayvon Generation by Elizabeth Alexander, and it reads, "They ask me to remember, but they want me to remember their memories, and I keep on remembering mine." Alexander describes Clifton as simultaneously frontal and subversive, which are 2 qualities I hope to bring in the work that I make. I want to offer you 2 more quotes to triangulate my concerns as a research-based artist before I move into my work. This Toni Morrison quote is from the transcript of a talk and Q&A that she gave, which was published in 1995 in the 2nd edition of Inventing the Truth, the Art and Craft of Memoir, edited by William Zinsser, which reads, "When I hear someone say truth is stranger than fiction, I think that old chestnut is truer than we know, because it doesn't say that truth is truer than fiction, just that it's stranger, meaning that it's odd. It may be excessive, it may be more interesting, but the important thing is that it's random, and fiction is not random. Therefore, the crucial distinction for me is not the difference between fact and fiction, but the distinction between fact and truth. Because facts can exist without human intelligence, but truth cannot." And this final third quote from James Baldwin, you may have seen, I've seen it shared widely on social media. But I want to offer you a little more context and zoom out to the words surrounding this quote. It comes from an essay that Baldwin penned for the New York Times in 1962, the message still resonates with artists today. And I'm going to read you the last 3 paragraphs. Feel free to swap artist with writer, whatever you hear. "We are the generation that must throw everything into the endeavor to remake America into what we say we want it to be. Without this endeavor, we will perish. However immoral or subversive this may sound to some, it is the writer who must always remember that morality, if it is to remain and become morality, must be perpetually examined, cracked, changed, made new. He must remember, however powerful the many who would rather forget, that life is the only touchstone and that life is dangerous. And without the joyful acceptance of this danger, there can never be any safety for anyone, ever, anywhere." What the writer is always trying to do is utilize the particular in order to reveal something much larger and heavier than any particular can be. Thus, Dostoevsky in The Possessed used a small provincial town in order to dramatize the spiritual state of Russia. His particulars were not very attractive, but he depicted invent them, he simply used what was there. Our particulars are not very attractive either, but we must use them. They will not go away because we pretend that they are not there. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. The principal fact that we must now face, and that a handful of writers are trying to dramatize, is that the time has now come for us to turn our backs forever on the big two-hearted river. So that last bit is a reference to the Ernest Hemingway short story published in 1925, The Big Two-Hearted River, because, well, Baldwin knew how to throw shade, for one, but also because criticizing the quote-unquote great writers of his time for nostalgia of a place that never existed. The myth of a virgin country that was shaped by adventurers. And I think it's instructive to see quite how long this conversation has been a part of the broad public discourse. This letter was published in the New York Times after all. While I make no claims to being a great artist, LOL, I do try to wrestle with what it is we have, our particular American toolbox. I pull from and play with the media of our everyday lives, books, graphic design, billboards, broadsides, postcards, surveillance footage, etc. So I'm going to jump ahead in time. I enrolled in graduate school in 2014. And I made this proposal for a mural that was never made. And I was thinking about modernism and abstract art and the messages embedded in our world around us, right? Sorry. So if you were to wear red glasses, which I intended to somehow provide in the installation of this, it would have read Black Lives Matter. Inspired by a class I took with Ann Tyler, another brilliant bookmaker who I'm inspired by. This book, for safety's sake, I made the class with her. I was dealing with the story of Emilio Mayfield, who was stopped for jaywalking on his way to school. This story made the national news circuit. He was wrestled to the ground by multiple officers and detained for walking through a bus stop. When his story was first reported on, many of my peers' response was that at least he didn't get shot. To me, that wasn't good enough, and I was angered, really, inspired enough to make a book about it. So I began to look at the event itself, the history of jaywalking ordinances, and the continuous ongoing state-sanctioned violence against Black children. In this case, it's particularly ironic as it was clothed in the language of protection. Emilio should not jaywalk because he could get hit by a car, leads to Emilio being hit by multiple police officers who all felt justified in their actions. Our particulars are not very attractive, but we must. These are just some spreads from inside the book, and that was a quote from his interview where he says, "I see myself as a great young man, excellent in school." During this time, I also began A Dozen Deaths. I would not finish it for another year and a half, but sometimes projects take longer than a semester in which you begin them. Any students in the audience remember this? My birthday is February 27th. That's the day after Trayvon Martin was killed, and I will always remember him. The conversations around this case were particularly enraging. Geraldo Rivera suggested that he should not have been wearing a hoodie. I saw red. The lack of common sense and compassion that would excuse the senseless murder of a child because of his sweatshirt is still shocking to me, and I believe it should shock you too. With A Dozen Deaths, I was trying something new. Since we were never able to hear Trayvon's side of the story, and since this was publicized widely, I took an experimental approach to telling this story, and it was new to me. Perhaps others have tried something similar. Partially inspired by our own justice system, a jury of 12 people deciding the case, and partially just my own sense of how to get a reader to meditate on the fact of this violence happening over and over and over and over and over again, I decided to present 12 separate stories. The structure is borrowed from Kazuko Watanabe. He used this structure for his beautiful book, The Diary of a Sparrow. Sorry, we'll come back to that. The epigraph reads, like narrative, imperialism has monopolized the entire system of representation. This is lifted from Edward Said's essay, Two Visions in Heart of Darkness, included in his collection of writings, Culture and Imperialism. To me, it was the perfect citation, pointing the curious reader towards this essay in which Said addresses the ways that dominant culture works to obscure outside truths. And he does it by writing about Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, written between 1898 and 1899. If we zoom out once more from this clip, what Said wrote was, Conrad's realization is that if, like narrative, imperialism has monopolized the entire system of representation, which in the case of Heart of Darkness allowed it to speak for Africans as well as for Kurtz, the main character of the story, and the other adventurers, including Marlowe and his audience, your self-consciousness as an outsider can allow you actively to comprehend how the machine works, given that you and it are fundamentally not in perfect synchrony or correspondence. Right? This felt particularly relevant to me in the way the story was being told. So a dozen parts can be read sequentially, or it can be read extended into a sculptural book object, which I believe it is in the show, so you can see it like this. In this way, each story can be read in any order, and 12 people can read it at once. The stories are nestled within panels, and each individual story tells the tale of a person walking home alone at night, only to be stopped by someone who thinks they don't belong there, and that person kills them. I asked each participant to try to remember. So I had 12 different people retell the story of what they remembered of the Trayvon Martin case. And I asked them, in this case, to use their imagination slightly and tell it in a first person. And the only hard rule was that they had to die. So each story is slightly different based on their remembrance and the personal details they chose to include, and the way that they felt they would experience a similar event, sort of based on who they were as a person. But I don't tell you what their demographics are. You kind of have to assume that based on what you read in each story. The interior pages are decorated with images created from one of two stencils I made that use the hooded figure silhouettes found on neighborhood watch signs. So I made two stencils, one of each of these symbols, and then I reoriented these figures, combining them in different various colors to create a variety of forms that could appear to be trees, monsters, figures, hands, among other things. And for me, this was a reference to this idea that the child in a hoodie, if you don't just see a teenager, what is it that you're seeing? What is this monstrous form? I made 5 copies of this book, and the one that sits in the show today is the first copy that was made. I'm going to move on from this book. Then after graduate school, or towards the end of graduate school, something happened that would give my research a focus that has directed most of my projects for the last 8 years. I was reading Isabel Wilkerson's The Warmth of Other Suns, an epic tale of the Great Migration, when she mentions a green guide that some people use to travel through the country. That minor detail in a 640-page book really ate away at me, and I had to learn what this guide was. I couldn't believe that I didn't know what she was talking about. I was lucky. At the time, the New York Public Library had put out high-def scans of every copy they held of the Green Book, originally titled the Negro Motorist Green Book, published by Victor Green and his wife Alma. After my initial research, I realized that for Chicago, the guide was largely incomplete. It would get you to the general areas that had been designated for Black Americans to live as segregation was legal at the time, but it did not tell the whole story. This sent me on a bit of a detour because I began to look for places in Chicago that were not in the Green Book, and it was during this search that I stumbled on this little sentence on the Avondale Neighborhood Association website that read, "The first house of worship in the Avondale neighborhood in Chicago was an AME church." That was it. And it moved on to other parts of the story, talking about Polish immigrants and other churches. But if you know what AME stands for, African Methodist Episcopal, then you would know that there had to be a community living nearby. In the end of the 19th century, people were not traveling across the city to go to church. So, and also, this being on the northwest side of Chicago was simply not what we learned about the settlement patterns in Chicago. And that's where I'm from. I've lived here almost my entire life. I was shocked to read this. So I dedicated, sorry, this is another Green Book image. Here we are. I dedicated my A show installation to learning more about this community. And this was a map that I found in my research. So you can see map of Logan Square District as it was in 1881, and the circled section of the small inset is what the larger cutout is, and there's a colored section. So I was looking for more information about this community. There were almost no names associated with the houses in the colored section on this map. I created this installation using, the pattern is based on a map of Avondale, and it reads, "We need to know where we live in order to imagine living elsewhere. We need to imagine living elsewhere before we can live there," which is a line lifted from Avery Gordon's Ghostly Matters, Haunting and Sociological Imagination, in which she brilliantly links horror, history, and haunting, arguing for the ways past social forces can control present-day life in ways often unseen. So accompanying this wall and text was a newspaper I designed and published with much of my research and questions for the reader, asking anyone with information on the displaced community from Avondale to please reach out. This led to learning more about the foundations of that community. One man in particular, the Reverend Charles Dawson. At the same time that I was learning about the history of the area, I was also talking to people who live in present-day Avondale, where I was also a resident. Part of what drew me to this project was that it was literally in my backyard. It seems that wherever you just scratch the surface, all kinds of historically significant stories come up. So part of what I learned was that the map that John Steeman made that initially pointed me towards this colored section did not accurately represent the entirety of the Black community that was living there at the time. So the second map that's on your right comes from a fire insurance, so Mitchell's real estate map of Chicago and suburbs. And on the sort of left half in the center, you can see Dawson's subdivision. So giving these two maps together, you get a sense of the scale and vibrancy of the burgeoning group. I created this composite map to link those two together. By 1920, there was only one Black family left in Avondale, according to the US Census. So, as a part of this project, I ended up giving tours of the area. I talked about the dynamic Reverend Charles Dawson and a few other members of the community. The person who wrote this letter, these pages were included in the newspaper I published, and also the person who wrote it, Mrs. Frances P. Graham. The house that she lived in when she wrote it was on the tour. It happened to be in that same geographical area. And this was a billboard that I had installed in the neighborhood. It's me giving one of the tours. And that's a better picture of the billboard. Taken in Avondale Park, which is in the center of the neighborhood, and that is a park that was destroyed by the installation. It had been 1 acre, and now it is much, much smaller. The field house itself is bigger than the park area, including this pool, when the highway system was put in. And that was very intentional, that the highway bisected this neighborhood like that at the time, although it was sort of anti-Polish sentiment that directed that installation. This brings me to my latest book and the second book in show. After finishing the Avondale project, I returned to my initial Green Book research, and I decided to visit and photograph every single site listed for Chicago in the 1962 edition. I felt that photography was the best way to carry the message that I was seeing and visiting these sites most powerfully. That's because almost every single one now today is a vacant lot or a building out of it. So these are some images, the places. They had been hotels, jazz clubs, restaurants, and in many of the restaurants, lots of performers worked there as well. The second floor of this building was one of the only all-ages jazz clubs called the Birdhouse. So, in addition to using photography, this book takes the form of a postcard book. And I just want to talk a little bit about that. So I was visiting the DuSable Museum, the DuSable Black History Museum and Education Center, formerly the DuSable Museum of African American History, here in Chicago, around the time that I was conceiving this project, when I came across these postcards from World War II. They were postcards sent home by soldiers featuring bombed out cities that they had been in, fought for, and might yet still die in. I had never seen postcards like this before, and the images stuck with me. Eventually, I thought, what better way to represent the spirit of my Green Book project? Not only the gravity of the situation, but also the initial inspiration of travel, the connection to history, the opportunity to share this project should you choose to mail these postcards. And also the ongoing pride of place that Chicagoans, many Chicagoans hold for Bronzeville, despite it being victim of repressive economic and housing policies. I'm still working with this material today, dreaming up new ways to use this knowledge and create artistic interventions in our everyday lives. most recently, I was invited to the Southside Community Arts Center here in Chicago. And in addition to presenting the last Green Book, I was able to offer a tour of sites listed in the Green Book that were within walking distance of their center. So Hotel Brookmont was one of them. And these are two famous people. We have a singer and also a manager from the Negro Leagues who had worked at the hotel. And yes, I'm gonna wrap it up here. Thank you so much for listening to my practice. And I would just like to open it up for any questions people might have. That's kind of where I'm at with making. So thank you very much.
What are some of the ways that the community that you engaged with responded to the research and to the work that you've created?
Yeah, thanks. With the Avondale project, many people who live there today had never heard of this community, the Reverend Charles Dawson, or even knowing that there had been a burgeoning African American community in the area. And so a lot of it was curiosity, and that was another thing that sort of led me to offering this tour as a way to share this information. When we were talking about the state of the neighborhood today, I got a whole variety of answers. A lot of people were talking about gentrification, without any prompting from me. And the headpiece that you see the model wearing in the billboard says "Todo está bien," because there was a moment when I was asking a gentleman who spoke mostly Spanish, and he was with his young daughter. She was maybe 11 or 12. And I asked him if there was anything he would change in the neighborhood, and he said, no, todo está bien. And I can perhaps understand why he might say that, but we were a stone's throw away from an encampment of houseless people. And not only that, but maybe there was like one thing you might want to change, and he just said no. And so then I turned to her thinking, of course she's gonna say, I wish we had, a bigger park. I mentioned that park had been diminished from being 1 acre to being very tiny, or something like that, right? And she looked at her father and she said, no, todo está bien. And so for me, that was representative of how sort of attitudes are passed generationally. And that's why that's included in the billboard specifically. But I got a variety of responses. And some people who didn't want to talk to me at all, which is totally fine as well. For that project, I also engaged people in a multitude of ways. So I held a couple of forums at Park District buildings. I built a lemonade stand and offered free lemonade. The only thing you had to do was talk to me. So a lot of different ways of engaging people.
So my question is about the pattern on the gray or silver and white striped pattern on parts of the book, A Dozen Deaths. If there was an inspiration for that, and what it is.
Yeah, thank you for asking. There is, actually, very much so. It's meant to be evocative, sort of two things, right? Of siding. So it is a photograph of siding that I took just from a random house in Chicago. And then I altered it in Photoshop to get those weird colors. And it's also meant to be evocative of lines. So thinking about looking in, looking out, thinking about the housing complex that Trayvon Martin was walking through, where all the buildings looked exactly the same, right? So when you stand this book up and stretch it out, you can sort of kind of bring that to mind. But then also the figures that are painted on the inside, if the light is hitting it a certain way, you see the shadows from the other side. So there's more than one reading and multiple ideas that I'm trying to carry through that imagery.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions?
Hi, I am wondering, I think you said you have other practices you engage in. And the Mylar, the red Mylar was an example of that. And I'm wondering what they are and how you experience the connection between them as you move from one medium to the next.
Absolutely. So beyond making artist books, installation work, sort of the tours that I've been offering, although that is still a growing practice that I'm investigating. And image making in other ways, sort of more of like a printmaking practice that is not restricted to being within a book or publication. Those are all ways that I engage with ideas. And really for me, the project and the idea sort of drives the output. So I think that's why I spent so much time talking about how I ended up getting to this idea of postcards for the postcard book, for the last green book, because it really that'll kind of, as I spend time with the material and with the history and thinking through the stories, I can kind of decide like which way I'm gonna go with how the thing is expressed. And I'm sorry, was there a second part to that question?
I think you kind of answered it. It was just how your practices connect. But
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
I have a question. Back to your Trayvon Martin piece, the research or exercise you did when you asked the different people about their own, telling the story from the first person. Can you speak a little bit more to that? I was excited to hear not excited, but I was very interested to hear what came after you asked those questions of those people.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, like I said, I was thinking about us collectively as people and how we handle these situations and thinking about a jury and how that's this collective body that's representative of us as a society. And so I did my best to find, they were all people either I knew or friends of friends who were recommended for this project. So I didn't stray too far outside, but I tried to get a group of people that was as diverse as possible in age, race, sexual orientation, gender expression, and sort of like as broad demographic as I had access to. And then I met with each person one-on-one and explained the project to them. And if they were comfortable with it, then I gave them some time to sort of get their thoughts together to think about. So some people were ready to go right away, and some people were like, okay, I need a minute. Let's meet again in like a week. and then I recorded the story that they told. And so they had the chance to like stop and start again, and a couple people did have to tell the story like 3-4 times, and then I transcribed and edited the story down into each little section in the book. If you go through and read, you'll see there's such a variety of ways of handling telling that story, and it was a challenge, but they sort of understood what I was trying to do with the book, and so were willing to go there with me.
Are there any other questions? Okay, well then, thank you very much for taking that. This one after this one, yeah. Hopefully you're going to be able to join us later for the panel discussion. Many things in there. Okay, so now it is my honor to introduce our second artist this morning. Was I supposed to wait? Well, maybe I'll just keep talking. It's still my honor to introduce our second artist this morning. Lyall Harris has 3 works in the exhibition. Grace, an artist book presented in 3 different forms. Harris's 2 additional pieces are collaborations with Patricia Silva. The Unapologetic Initiative is a mixed media interactive installation engaging visitors throughout the run of the exhibition. Without Fault turns questions of conventional beauty upside down, pointing out the humor and tragedy in vintage beauty guides, with echoes of today's impossible social media standard of beauty. Harris holds a BA in art history from Northwestern University and an MFA in book art and creative writing from Mills College as the inaugural graduate in the nation's first MFA of this kind. She teaches book art and creative writing workshops and classes, most recently at James Madison University, the University of Virginia, and at the Virginia Center for the Book. Please join me in welcoming Lyall Harris.
We'll have to look at yourselves. Sorry. I think of it. Sorry. I don't want to waste your time. Sorry, I can't be better.
Thanks for your patience while we figure out our technology today. We just have to take our Zoom down and get Lyall's presentation up, folks.
Sorry, I'm taking up room.
Don't be apologetic.
Sorry, I have Sorry, I forgot to run that errand. Sorry, I get irritated. Sorry, I yelled. Sorry, I'm tired. Sorry, I'm not good at this. Sorry, I'm exhausted. Sorry, I'm focused on something that interests me. Sorry, I'm late. Sorry, dinner isn't ready yet. Sorry, I'm tense. Sorry, I don't feel like talking. Sorry, I'm distracted. Sorry, I should take care of that. Sorry, I'll be right there. Sorry, your room isn't clean today. Sorry, I forgot you needed that. Sorry, I don't want to. Sorry, I should have. Sorry, I don't fit whatever that ideal is. Sorry, I'm not sure. Sorry, I have needs. Sorry, I prefer something else. Sorry, I'd like a little quiet. Sorry, I forgot to run that errand. Sorry, I have faults. Sorry, I have wrinkles. Sorry, I seem mad. Sorry, that's a mess. Sorry, I don't remember. Sorry, I have stretch marks. Sorry, I haven't organized that yet. Sorry, that's uncomfortable. Sorry, I don't feel like cooking. Sorry, I don't like to wear makeup. Sorry, high heels hurt my feet. Sorry, I didn't come right away when you called. Sorry, I don't know. Sorry, I need a break. Sorry, I don't want to have plastic surgery. Sorry, I'm not perfect. Sorry if it seems like I don't love you. Sorry, I should be more sorry. Did I make you nervous at the beginning? Now I'm ready for the first one. Oh, I didn't need to do that.
From the beginning.
I'm not.
Far left.
Oh, I can't, okay. Thank you. Thank you all. I am going to talk about the 3 projects in this exhibit. Without Fault is the first one I'm going to talk about, but I'd like to first go back in time. Without Fault is a collaborative book I made with my collaborator, Patricia Silva, in Italy, but I'm going to go back a few years prior. That book is from 2015, and talk about an altered book I made titled Sorry. I altered The Christian Doctrine for Children's Education, which was an early 18th century publication. I altered a facsimile. This is a book about the shortcomings of motherhood. And as you can see, I took out the core of the book and used those pages, and on the prayer flags, I printed sorry phrases. I'm sorry, I don't know how to be the mother you need. I'm sorry I'm still making mistakes. I'm sorry things I say cause you to doubt yourself. I'm sorry I can't save you from your future suffering. That's a precursor to Without Fault. Patricia Silva and I met in 2013 in Florence. We didn't know each other. We sat down for coffee, and 3 hours later we realized we had a lot in common. We began collaborating soon thereafter. Our collaborations worked at first for several years in that we exchanged materials. One of us started with an idea and a set of materials, gave it to the other artist who brought the project to a kind of halfway point and then could edit or add materials but stayed true to the original concept, and then gave the halfway book back to the originating artist who then finished it. And the next time we would change who started the project. So in this book, Without Fault, Patricia gave me French fashion magazines from the 1950s. What struck me the most were these ads. These ads were all aimed at women striving for perfect appearance. And I added to this book, to this project, a book I found. I was living in Italy at the time, and these sort of free library exchanges were popping up. And this was a book called Beautiful Today, Beautiful Tomorrow. The content was quite similar, aiming at perfect appearance, but with a specific focus on plastic surgery. The subtext of both of these publications is simply that we women are unacceptable. It got pretty specific about what we can do to alter your body. So I was going through these and I thought, oh, my parents are going to be horrified that I'm showing this. But this appears in the project. The fact is, there is a kind of horror at the heart of this kind of thinking, and in my view, this kind of intervention. You know, it's hard not to feel guilty for who we are and how we move through the world when the pervasive subtext is that we are unacceptable. This project culminated in a multi-part project. It's too complicated to go into all of the facets of it, and I just have selected a few here. You can see the French ads. I have a little thing. And then this is the content from the Italian Beautiful Today, Beautiful Tomorrow book. And here are the stories that I just performed for you in this book. There's a stitching sampler, and there's some facts that I'll read, a few of those in a minute. Common were stitching samplers back in the day. This, however, these are surgical stitches. So we made a stitching sampler inside a dress pattern, but with surgical stitches, plastic surgery stitches. We were the case studies for our imperfections and how to achieve this kind of perfect state that these publications strive for. But I'll go back and read a couple of some of the facts from that we gathered and put into case files. Sewing and needlework were considered to be the most essential domestic skill a mother should teach her daughter, and needlework was one of the primary ways a girl was trained in her society's ideology of womanhood. Since 1997, the number of cosmetic surgical procedures for women has increased by 471%. This book is from 2015, I'm sure it's gone up. In an attempt to achieve a socially desired hourglass body form, many women in the past wore corsets that severely constricted their breathing and damaged internal organs. I know this is very uplifting, right? It has been shown that teachers perceive attractive children as more intelligent, more engaged in school, and more likely to succeed academically than unattractive children. In the past, many women were left crippled by the practice of foot binding. So, I'm going to talk about, I'm sorry, those are the pages some of those I read. So we had these sort of data points, our data points, intermingled with those kinds of facts. I'm going to talk about the Unapologetic Initiative, but before I do that, I want to just touch on a book that Patricia and I did. And the reason I want to touch on this one is because it's a book in which we really had passersby and volunteers become our co-creators. And that informed the Unapologetic Initiative. So I want to just share this project with you just briefly. This book began with me making 200 origami boats. And when we were living in Italy, and still today, there's a huge immigration crisis occurring. It was reaching a sort of peak at the, I'm sure it surpassed that now. This was, I don't know, maybe several years ago in any case. We invited folks to, if they would have their hands photographed with the boats, if they would be willing also to have their portrait taken, photograph, and if they would offer us a quote. And they could do any one of those things or none of them, of course. Here are some of the pages from the book. We were in Italy, so some of the quotes were in English, some were in Italian. This means the world belongs to everyone. So this became a photo documentary, really, about this immigration crisis, humanitarian crisis. We didn't state our point of view also when we gathered the quotes, so we had a range. And oh, by the way, I brought this book. This is a digital book. We ended up making 150 copies of it. Don't take the one I brought, but you're welcome to look through it. And there are some other ephemera you are welcome to take about Patricia and me and our collaborations. And that is occupying the unapologetic table, so not to be confused. I also would love for you to participate in Unapologetic, but there's some other things there just for today that you're welcome to take a look at. That's the book, and we have a sort of enclosure over here, which I did not bring today. Oh, this is very important. Coffee. Anyone who knows me knows that's the case. Patricia and I often meet over coffee. Sometimes we have no idea what our next project is. And by the end of the coffee date, we usually have a pretty good grasp on it. We had an opportunity to come to the Virginia Center for the Book in Charlottesville. It's a letterpress and bookbinding studio. And we met in Florence a couple months before that and said, well, what in the world are we going to do with these 2 weeks we have at the Center for the Book? And we just began talking about what was on our minds, what was in the air for us. And it was, again, this sense that we and many of our female friends have struggled to occupy our rightful place in our lives and in the world. And we revisited the sorries of Without Fault. And we thought, you know, what if we turned that on its head and we became unapologetic about all of those things and more? And so, informed also by the Paper Boats Project, we really wanted this to be a participatory endeavor. And so we went to the Center for the Book. We began this project. This was 2 years ago. And because we had this beautiful letterpress opportunity, we decided to make broadsides. And that is just to say letterpress posters. The ones we made are over there framed. There's a wonderful collection of wood type and other type at the Center for the Book, and we used various fonts, typefaces for this project just for fun, because it's fun to do this kind of work. And then we also sort of launched it, soft launch in Charlottesville. We went out to the public and we hosted a few events at the center. And our best ideas really came from women. And for those of you who've never seen the letterpress in action, oh, let's see if I can remember how to do this. So that was fun, and we would love your participation. As I said, it really grows thanks to women who participate in this. In this iteration, you can come over and suggest a phrase and put a magnet on the wall. And just since the opening to today, we've updated some of the phrases thanks to folks who made some suggestions. Jane White taking credit. And what's your first name? I'm sorry. You said tough, and Ellen, tough and unapologetic. So we update them, and it is also exists in a mail-in form. That's postage paid. So please take as many as you like and give them to your friends. And we'd love to hear from you. And you might get a little keepsake in the mail from us if you do that. So I'm going to turn to another book with a very ostensibly different, there we are in Charlottesville launching this. And I was just going to say, we have been collaborating for almost 10 years. We have a lot of projects. Please visit my website. I have a collaborations page, and you can read more about what we do and learn about those projects. So I'm going to turn to a very different looking project that I've made by myself. And that is this book over here. It's shown along the wall there, and the book is there. It's called Grace. This book is about the breakdown in communication in a relationship and arriving at a place of grace in the pain and lack of resolve of this relationship. It is shown as the artist book, and you can't really touch these objects. They're kind of precious, which is a problem, and I think we're going to talk about that at the panel. But I made a digital copy of this book, and there are a couple of those here, so you can actually pick this up and fully read it, and it's as close as I could get to the experience of the original book. In addition, it's shown, and I'm very happy that the mayor was willing to do this, it's shown as I envisioned it also, which is with every facing page framed. And the reason I wanted to do that is because there's a nod to the Stations of the Cross in this kind of format. My friend said, you know that that's not the right number, right? And I said, I do know that. So I'm not trying to replicate the Stations of the Cross. But Catholicism is really at the center of this work, as well as letters, correspondence on the backs of these pages, and you can see that in the facsimile copy, are actual letters that I've received over the last 5 years from my ex-mother-in-law. So it's a personal book, but I hope it also speaks to the presence of grace where there's unresolved pain. I hope it does that. I know for me it was a book I had to make. The frames are intentionally kitsch. They're kind of meant to evoke a fetishistic aesthetic of a lot of Southern European Catholicism, so that's intentional. And most decisions book artists make are very intentional, and I just can't go into every one that I've made for the books you're looking at, but we try to think through most aspects of our work. Let's see, those are the backs of some of these pages. There's no one letter, I think they're 18 different pages with sort of randomly selected letters. And I'll read the text. The text I wrote, there's a poetic text that runs along the bottom of the facing pages. And I'll just read that now. Her letters come through the mail slot, a dead weight in the foyer. Sometimes I read them, sometimes I don't. The stack grows in a box, dream dark, in my shed. She is busy writing stories. The force of habit. Force. It was only a matter of sitting around the table calmly, a matter of tolerance, she writes, of compromise, a natural give and take. Mea culpa? Mea maxima culpa? What if there's a fist or a knife? What if he makes a noose and hangs a bird outside her granddaughter's window? My reply falters midway across the unbridgeable gap between us. She can't hear he wasn't the son. What if there's an end to who I was, the wife, mother who held on to the family's future safety? What if it happens quickly? It also wasn't quick at all. The dutiful wife, mother cannot go back to sleep, can no longer keep striving to make it seem perfect. She must now set about finding light and water, must move herself and the children swiftly towards light, swiftly towards water. It's simply no longer useful to dwell on the damage, and it would be cruel to ask his mother to hold the prism of him. That sharp-edged chunk of glass would tear a hole clean through her palm. Yet what it must be to endure the limitations of living inside that singular point of view. In the absence of understanding, prayer, and the possibility of grace. My ex-mother-in-law's name is Grazia, which means grace. So I'm going to read a few poems today, soon. You won't be here that long. And this is a poem I wrote before I made grace. It informed grace. My practice kind of goes from one thing to another, and they're interrelated. This is a standalone poem. A lot of my poems are, it's not part of an artist book. Treeless. Now I know these are simply stories. I have mine, you have yours, they have theirs. I receive letters, damning letters, from people I once loved, from people I believed loved me. And they seethe and tell me I'm wrong. Point to how I've bent wills and determined outcomes. I stand at the pile of mail in my entryway as the accusations rush past, because now I know these are merely stories. The story I'm committed to, also that one, just one among many. So I can be a tree, and winter may be approaching, and I may be leafless, and it might look like I'm naked, vulnerable. And for this, you may sense you have the upper hand. And if my bare limbs make you feel strong, I don't want to take that from you. You might need, in fact, I think you do need to feel strong. The thing is, I know my treeness. I know the gift of coming rest, the conservation of energy. I know how cold feels, wet wind, the ice, the inwardness required. And I am not afraid. And so you can be right if you need to be. I will be a tree to your rightness. A tree you can lean against and weep if you want to. Or rage. It's okay. These are just stories. The sun will shine on both of us, and leaves will grow. Woo. I am still a painter. Many of you know me as a painter. And I'm just going to run through a few things here. I'm not going to delve into a lot. I have a couple more things to share with you in depth, but not. Just thought I'd run through. These are older images. I come from landscape painting and poetry, and the artist book is really has been a beautiful marriage of form and content for me. That's a more recent work. And I'm going to run through some of my books. One thing I love about this medium is the variety of form. I had a teacher once tell me that I really needed to get a signature thing going, and I completely rejected that. I said, oh no, this is what I love about art and my practice and book art. Themes in my work generally hover around motherhood, as you can see, relationships, And I moved back to Virginia 8 years ago after 30 years in mostly Italy and San Francisco. And some of the themes are now about living in the South again. This talk is titled A Necessary Language, and by that, I think you know now, I mean the language of art. It's been a necessary language throughout my whole life. And I used to feel guilty about the privilege I have to dedicate myself to art until I finally embraced the simple fact that art is necessary. And here I would be remiss if I did not mention a heroine of the arts my whole life, my mother, Betty Harris. That's not all of it. My mother did not simply expose me and my sisters to art, my fellow artist sister Frankie and writer sister Elizabeth. She lived this value every day. This is who she is. I can still see her in her leotard and tights. I'm sure my friends can too. And she had a jean skirt pulled over it. It was a quick transition from dancer to mom. I do not know how Betty came out of the world she came out of and bridged it with her radically modern sensibilities. She streaked once in the 70s around the kitchen table. That was but she did do it, and she still does it, and she never misses a beat. And those of you who have the honor and privilege of knowing her know that to be true. And she's also practical and so full of life skills. And that gave me a kind of precision and focus. But Dad, not leaving you out. Billy Harris, lifelong lawyer, not lifelong, career lawyer. As many of you know, started drawing and making prints in his late 50s, and for the last 30 plus years has been making beautiful, imaginative drawings and prints. And Dad is also a lifelong magician. So he's had some things up his sleeve, literally. So what I want to mention about Billy are his signature characteristics. Dad's openness and curiosity towards other people. Intrinsic in this is how Billy leads with his heart. And his example has given me the capacity in my pursuit of this necessary language to go inside and bring the inside out. This last project, so thank you, Mom and Dad, and Frankie, and my family, and all the support. I am going to share one last visual project with you, and to set the stage, I'm going to read the standalone poem. But in the spirit of letting the content dictate the form, this last project I'm going to share is a film. I'm not a filmmaker, but I guess I sort of am now. A word. I walked easily into the dream on that overlook above vineyards, wearing that well-made dress. It was a most natural step, a step that was waiting, and I merely took it, already asleep to what was. And the dream deepened, and I was good at dreaming. If you'd peered into my life, watched me cook, say, or make the bed, you'd have seen something exacting about my technique, something pleasing depending on who you are. It might have pleased you. It pleased so many. How I cared for the children, how I encouraged their interests, planned trips, took their temperature, made hot chocolate with marshmallows. You might have been pleased. Many were pleased. But look harder if you can. Dare to startle my sleeping ear. Use a word. Say it. Gently, if gentle works, but say it. A word that lives in wakefulness. A word that seeps inside a crack. A word that seeks the morning. I'm going to share with you a 1-minute trailer of this film. My paternal grandmother, Annie Frank Preston, later Harris, went to college at Randolph Women's College and graduated in 1929 with a BA in Latin. So being here with you today connects me to my origin story. Annie Frank is specifically related to the content I just shared. I felt her presence during the difficult journey through the end of my marriage. It was as if she were assisting me in breaking an intergenerational chain of domestic violence that she could not break in her day for so many reasons. And I'd like to acknowledge Annie Frank's suffering and her strength. This last poem I'll read is one that addresses this felt presence of Annie Frank and the experience I had of a kind of identity death. That is the death of the wife staying loyal to an abusive marriage. The answer. The answer is that I would do it again. If you suggest otherwise, tell me, what alternative did I have? This had to be the way of it. The wolf of him howling at my back as I reach cliff's edge. Someone said we choose a partner who is the best and worst of our parents. But isn't this what we are? I guess I used him. It had to be him. Anything less and I would still be asleep. So I could find the end of the earth and jump. And while I was free falling, and the mask of my parents was peeling away, and the vow of my promise was damning me to hell, and my glowing in-laws were grasping at my wild flying hair, and my old self was bleeding out, I heard the thin trail of my grandmother's voice from the keyhole of her barricaded door over the racket of grandfather's drunk fists. But it caught the shell of my ear and resounded. Let her die, she called from that trapped world. Let her die so you can live, live, live. And I also want to acknowledge the land we're on and share this with you from the college's website, which states that this institution sits on the traditional lands of the Monacans, now based in Amherst County. In the 1600s, the Monacan people lived in communities spanning the New River to the fall line at Richmond. They hunted deer and elk, farmed the land, and traded with the Powhatans to the east and the Iroquois to the north, living by the ethos that the land is the people and the people are the land. And lastly, I'd like to thank Martha Johnson, who can't be with us here, Martha Chiplis, the curator, Laura McManus, Kathleen Fort, John Spanich and Debbie Spanich, and all the docents who've helped so much in this exhibit. And thank you all for being here today, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you. I did forget to mention one thing, which is that the film exists as a 10-minute short, but it's also a real-time 45-hour experience. And my next step is to find a venue to show this real time with an installation of the garment pieces. And here's my studio while we're talking about my I do have a light side. I just didn't show it. My pants, for one. It's very touching to see my parents here, of course, but also their friends. Thank you all so much, the senior generation of my life. I'm quickly approaching that. Yes, Valerie, thank you.
I don't really have a question, but I just really wanted to say thank you for sharing yourself.
Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. Yes.
When did the Sorry project come to your mind? At what age?
I had two young daughters, and maybe they were 7 and 10, and I think it's inherent in motherhood to feel inadequate and that we're making mistakes. And I just was so worried about making these mistakes and felt so apologetic. I think to my sisterhood, it would be interesting to have a note to self of how many times you say sorry throughout any day and what you're apologizing for. Might be worth making a mental note, and I think mothers do that a lot. And sometimes, it is true, we didn't grow up, we don't know how to be a mother until we're being a mother.
Mike for you.
You've kind of given us a lot to stick with.
I know.
I'd like to know if you knew Annie Frank.
Yes, Annie Frank lived until I was 11 years old, and I adored her. And my sister Elizabeth helped me find these old photos, and I didn't know her. It was shocking to see these photos, and I thought, of course, you imagine her here. And she was a student. She apparently was very vibrant. She drove a fire truck at one point with a bunch of other students piled in it, and it's really interesting to think of her life before I knew her as my grandmother. And she grew up in Roanoke, and so she's really why I'm here. We're here. She met my grandfather who lived here. I did not know anything about her suffering at all when I knew her living. That came to me later. So she was kind of an ideal grandmother to me.
I met your father when I was 5 years old. I knew your grandmother. I knew this grandmother.
Yeah.
Wow, you are a humanistic woman. You are a poet, a writer, an actress, an artist, and a philosopher.
Wow.
Philosopher. All praise to you.
Thank you. Thank you. planted a fan club in the audience.
I don't know if I need one. Thank you so much for sharing your work as a mother. It was really inspiring.
But thank you.
Thought-provoking. And I just wanted to reflect on the fact that you use the letters, because I often talk to my students about contemporary media and what we're going to lose based on the fact that so many people are just sending emails or texts, or no one's writing letters anymore. A few people write letters anymore. And just because your practice, a lot of your practice is rooted in, tactile objects, the book, paper. I just wondered if you had thoughts about that in terms of sort of modern communication technology and how that's just going to alter, what we have available to us, any of us.
I think it's that. And I think, and we may speak about some of this if you all hang out in the panel for the panel discussion, but I think it might be fair to say that the whole medium of book art, which is fairly new, I mean, their long history, we could go back, but is in a way our cultural response to the loss of this key cultural object, the book. And so now we're making these heightened, precious versions of them in a way to preserve them and to bring attention to them. Of course, they're digital artist books. I mean, there's many versions of what an artist book is as there are artists practicing in this medium. But I think that book art in general, the mushrooms on the wall, I mean, these are you can't, I don't know how you would digitize that. So this is a preservation in a way, I think. And in terms of letters, I still write letters. And I think I enjoy that. I grew up doing that. You're right that my children don't. And so, but my use of letters in this project was a little bit different. I mean, I did digitize these, and this was kind of, you might have a question about intellectual property on that, but they belong to me. Also, I don't think, these aren't going to be, this is not a trade edition book. These are limited edition books. They're not going to be really traded out in the world so much. But I think it's, I don't know, it's a practice that maybe we'll talk about in our talk more, but I would say write more letters. I mean, I love getting mail. I love when the mail comes through. It's just there's not much of interest in it now. The more you write, the more letters you'll receive. Betty?
I just thought the last image you showed for that, it would be interesting that's a different kind of form and a different subject and so forth. You might explain that if you want.
For that? Well, so some of the books I showed, I could go back. Some of the books I showed are what I consider simple gestures. So I enjoy distilling an idea to its kind of simplest, not simplistic, but simplest form where it can pack the most punch. This book is a book that looks fun and playful, and you probably know by now it isn't, right? So it's handprints that I did with my daughter, but the poem, I don't have it with me, but it's quite short, but it references a neighbor, a friend, my daughter's friend who came and played, and they painted each other's fingernails, and they had, when she went home, her mother, next time I saw her, the nail polish was off. And I said, oh, well, your nail polish is off, you didn't get in trouble for that, did you? And she said, no, she didn't hit me for that. So the hands become this playful thing, and the fingernail polish, but then you reach the end of the book and you realize, oh, there's violence here. And I used, for example, to the point of every materials considered, it's surgical tape that's holding the text down to the pages. So that was very, and there's a suturing on the foredge of with surgical thread, the foredge of where it's bound. So in this particular project, I was engaged in making a new book every week of the year for 1 year. And in that case, you can't really make a complicated project. It has to be distilled. It has to be something simple. So it really got me focused, sort of laser focused on this idea of the simple gesture. And this too was one of those books. It's a kaleidoscope that I covered. I bought a toy kaleidoscope and covered the outside with black paper and built this little accordion in the viewer that obscures the view. So when you look through it, it's sort of masked. And this book addresses this child who was an immigrant child in my daughter's class who was really falling through the cracks, and I was riding the bus with him one day and I realized, wow, this kid probably has some learning issues, but it will never be discovered. I mean, their resources are stretched. They can't address the needs of all of these kids who also don't speak Italian. And I thought, you know, the beauty, him as a kaleidoscope, we might lose that. We might lose this kid. So that's, yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much. I don't want to carry on.
One comment, if you don't mind going back to the studio shot. So I happen to be lucky enough to be Lyall's sister, and I remain in awe. But am I right? Well, I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you for sharing, and also the art as life, as a necessity. And I spent a lot of time, I lived in Asia, and I think I'm right, and I should be double checked, but I don't think there's a need for art in Balinese because it's life. And I thank you for bringing art to life and life to art. And I want to celebrate the fact that yes, Mom and Dad gave that whole beauty to us, but also that Lyall is giving it to her girls. But not because she says she taught them. It's because they lived it. They just are exceptional artists because they lived in the house with Lyall. And I think if I'm right, that is Savia's painting
Of Florence. Yeah, this is my dog. She did this in the pandemic. She was 13 and she did so my children are half Florentine, half Italian. So, yeah. Thank you, Frank. There's love in the room. Thank you all so much. Enjoy the reception and thank you.
We do have a reception in the second gallery. There's delicious food and delicious beverages. So enjoy yourself, and then we will be back here at 4 o'clock for a panel discussion. We will change the space, change the stage. So see you back here in a little bit.